Welcome back, everyone. We are going to continue in Unit 3 in talking about conservation and ethics. Today, we're going to discuss aquatic invasive species, otherwise known as AIS. What are aquatic invasive species? Here's a great example of an aquatic invasive species. These are silver carp. Silver carp are very large fish imported from Asia. When infested into a river and a boat drives through, they have this habit of jumping up out of the water. They believe that it is a kind of a fight or flight reflex by the fish to escape other predators in their native Asian territories. But it is incredibly hard on boaters and fishermen in the U.S. whenever they're traveling down a river at 10, 15 knots and these fish start flying out. Go on to YouTube. In fact, in the Unit 3 video selection, there are several videos on there about these fish just launching themselves out of the water and then crashing into the boats and into people. These things are not small fish. This one right here is probably 25 to 30 inches. They can weigh between 15, 25, 35 pounds quite easily. These are large fish. The other characteristic about these fish is when they do jump up out of the water, they impact with great force and have a tendency of, how do we say this, exploding. And I've talked to fishermen that are over on the Wabash River here in Indiana, that when they hit a pocket of these things, the entire river just erupts, and you have all of these 25-pound flying bombs in the air that they're traveling through, and it hits the boats, and it will just totally knock out a $1,500 Garmin fish finding system, break antennas, break rods, just cause havoc. And when they explode, now you got fish guts and blood all over the place. People slip and they fall and they hurt themselves that way. These are just a really, really nasty invasive species that we have. A lot of boat damage, a lot of people damage. You get smacked in the face with a 25-pound weight, when you're going through the water at 25 miles an hour, it is going to leave a mark. So a lot of these fishermen, when they pull their boats and are heading home, their first stop is the car wash, because they've got to hose their boat out to get rid of all the blood and guts left over from these fish. These fish were introduced into the U.S., of course, in the deep south, Mississippi, Alabama, probably Louisiana, in fish ponds, particularly aquaculture ponds and bait ponds. Remember, most of our minnows that we fish with, we go to the bait store, buy a couple dozen minnows. They come from the deep south. They are raised specifically for bait. To keep those ponds clean, back during the 70s, they imported these silver carp. These are very much rough fish. They do not eat normal food the game fish are going to pursue. They are filter feeders. They eat the plankton, the zooplankton, photoplankton, so on and so forth, out of the water. So you can put them in a pond, and as they filter out the plankton, they're cleaning the water, and you can maintain very good water quality. But The problem is that the first flood that comes through washes through these ponds. Now they're into the Mississippi River. From the Mississippi, they just travel upstream into the Missouri River, the Red River, the Tennessee River, up to the Ohio River, into the Wabash River, and right up our good old White River. We have silver carp at the base of Lake Monroe Dam. They have not gotten into Lake Monroe yet. DNR is just terrified that these guys are going to make the jump, figuratively, from Salt Creek, right below the dam, into Lake Monroe. And from Lake Monroe, they can travel up Salt Creek into Brown County and then eastward. How would they make this jump? Well, some fisherman down below the dam wants to catch some bait and uses a cast net, collects 2 or 3 dozen small bait fish, then takes them up into Lake Monroe and fishes with them. When he's done, he dumps the bucket into Lake Monroe, hence a stocking program. And so if you go down to the dam, there are all kinds of signs warning fishermen not to do this because they don't want to get the silver carp into Lake Monroe. Well, what's the big deal if they do get into Lake Monroe? The big deal is that these guys eat plankton. Yeah, so largemouth bass don't eat plankton. No, but largemouth bass do eat fish that eat plankton. So they're disrupting the food chain at the base level. And it's very much like the gizzard shad. The gizzard shad ate plankton, and it nearly collapsed the lake until they introduced the aquatic invasive species. So these things are not good. Silver carp reproduce like crazy. I forget the exact numbers, but I believe that they can spawn almost like every month of the year. It is just phenomenal how quickly these fish can reproduce, and it's phenomenal how quickly these fish grow to reproductive age. There have been entire sections of rivers that are declared dead. The Missouri River is incredibly impacted by silver carp and Asian carp in general. Just entire sections, miles and miles of river that are dead. There's no smallmouth, largemouth, bluegill, minnows, carp, anything. It's just gone, except for the silver carp. In fact, I don't think I have a video in the list on this, but if you Google Missouri River Asian Carp Tournament, you will find videos of a vain attempt of trying to control these things, in which organizers at the one place, they announced a tournament. People would come in all manner of fishing boat, of ski boat, things like that, armed with nets, very large landing nets. And you would go out into the river, and as the boat is moving through the water, the sound of the engine activates these fish to go airborne. You have a net, you catch the fish airborne, dump them into the boat, and when your boat gets full, near sinking, you go back to the dock, unload these things, and they weigh them. And the highest number of landed fish that day win a special prize. And you can imagine, there are literally tons of fish taken out of the river this way. What do they do with the landed fish? Well, Purina Pet Food has sent semi-truck trailers. I am not making this up. Semi-truck trailers to the landing areas, and they are taking the fish back to their plants, and it becomes dog food and cat food. I believe they also turn some of this into fertilizer, fish meal. So, and of course, it doesn't really even put a dent in the ecosystem. I mean, these things are just so there are so many of them. There are other more sporting type events. Bow hunters, archers have really gotten into this, where you're out on a boat and, oh, look, a fish flying through the air, and you shoot it, and you reel it in, and that's bow fishing bonanza. I mean, it's incredible. Tennessee has really encouraged bow fishermen to go after these carp. They will go into there's videos along the Tennessee River, and I believe even in the Ohio River. Well, they'll go up to the back of one of the dams and like gun the engine, and these carp just explode up out of the water. Look this up on YouTube. It's absolutely incredible. So, welcome to a new aquatic invasive species. There are two specific types. There are the silver Asian carp that we just saw. This is the big head carp. That's the fish, not the fisherman. Here is the another big head carp. One thing that you can use for identification is the position of the eye. You can see right here that the eye is positioned below a center line from the mouth to the tail. And if we go back to the silver carp, here's the mouth and a straight line back to the tail. You can see that the eye is below that. So these Asian carp all have a low set eye. Here's a placard that you'll see at many of the boat ramps, and the big head up here, and then the silver carp down here. Then it goes into the scale patterns and things like that. Here is a rather poor illustration of a silver carp, a gizzard shad, and a big head carp. And you can see these things look kind of similar to each other. If you were just given this a passing glance, you would say, yeah, these are like the same fish. You can see the gizzard shad's eye is mounted above that center line. But you know, these things are squirming all over the place, and it gets a little hard to tell. So this is the real problem that we have with spreading. That especially if you're using bait fish like this, you can accidentally introduce these invasive species into a body of water accidentally. We talked about the common carp. Technically, it is an invasive species that, again, we imported. I think we are kind of resigned that this is a native fish now. You can argue the issue. Generally, carp are not terribly disruptive. They are bottom feeders. Invertebrates, they're not affecting the plankton. They do damage in lakes and rivers in the fact that they root in the bottom. They stir up mud. They can cause turbidity. A lot of people do not want these, and particularly private lakes. They can pretty much turn a nice pristine lake into a big mud hole. And if you're a bow fisherman or a fisherman, you might very easily gain access to private waters if you target carp and remove them. If we look at the Great Lakes, in which Lake in which Indiana shares a very small portion of in Lake Michigan. We can look at the Allwife invasion. These came into the U.S., I believe, in the 50s or 60s. Now, allwives are an ocean fish, a saltwater fish, of kind of like a sardine, and they're a food source for tuna and everything else in the ocean. They made their way in. I believe the allwife came in through I think it was the Ohio Erie Canal. No, it wasn't the Ohio Erie Canal. It was the canal that cut across New York State from Lake Ontario to the Hudson River. And these things were in the Hudson River naturally, and whenever they opened up that canal, this was back in like the 1840s, 1850s, the allwife got into the canal and made their way all the way to Lake Ontario, and from Ontario into Erie, into Huron, into Michigan, into Superior. There, I covered all 5 Great Lakes. This was a very much like the gizzard shad. It was a food source that was not needed, and it really started to collapse the other natural species in there. This is when they introduced the salmon into the Great Lakes to eat the allwife. And we never want to say that aquatic invasive species is a good thing, but it did create a new sport fishing industry in the Great Lakes. So this is a round goby, cute little fish, lives on the bottom, has very interesting fins, and these great big round eyes. They really don't do any harm other than eating everything that everything else wants to eat. They can very much disrupt the ecosystem of other type fish like this, such as the sculpin. They have gotten into the Great Lakes. They are throughout states like Minnesota. They do kind of have a benefit of a forage fish that other fish are just jumping on. If you want to catch good big bluegill, go to Minnesota. I mean, they are producing 5-pound bluegill. I mean, that is just unheard of in Indiana. But there's lakes up there that are infested with these gobies, and the bluegill are just chomping out. They're going crazy. I believe Arizona also has these gobies in some of their reservoirs, and again, bluegill are just ballooning, because of this new forage fish.